Tom, Hannah, Charlotte, I've got you assembled for another, hopefully in the future, award-winning ergonomics show. But I just wanted to know whether I've done something bad or done something good, possibly from an environmental side of things. Caught what I think was a rat the other day in the house. The only thing I had to hand was a Tupperware box to stick it in. I put it in the dishwasher. It's been cleaned. Should I have been putting my bagels in it for my lunch?
No, I think you should have absolutely chucked that out. If it's had a rat in and around it, it needs to go.
I'd have gone for a trip to the washing up bowl just to make sure.
I think get the little label gun out, label it rat. You're sorted for next time he comes back.
Or if I make some ratatouille and I've got too much to... need to freeze some.
Right, note to self, guys, do not accept any food from Martin, especially if he comes in with some ratatouille in a Tupperware box.
Oh, when you said ratatouille, I just had images of Martin with a chef's hat on, and he lifts the chef's hat up, and the rat is there controlling his movements by pulling his hair off of the film. Hello and welcome to Ergonomics with
Charlotte,
Tom
and me, Hannah. Plenty coming up in this episode, including a deep dive into the world of dairy.
Yes, AHDB's been doing some research on protein-rich products.
While I've been hearing how spend on organic dairy has grown this past year.
The volumes of cow's dairy purchased within organic increased by 7% compared to the previous year. And then we look at total cow's dairy, which actually saw a decline of 0.7% during that same period.
As anticipated, it was announced in last week's spending review that DEFRA will see a 2.7% reduction in overall real spending over the 5 years to 2029.
We'll explain how we'll be doing some analysis of what it means for our farmers.
A quick reminder, new episodes of Ergonomics drop at midday every Wednesday.
So follow us wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss a show.
And make sure to get in touch. The show wouldn't be anything without you. Comment on any of the AHDB's social channels.
Or email ergonomics@ahdb.org.uk. Hello again and welcome back to the Ergonomics podcast with me, Tom, Charlotte and Hannah. Charlotte, what's going on this week? I hear it's a bit of an exciting week in the world of retail and consumer insights.
Wow. Very exciting. National Picnic Week. I mean, who doesn't love a picnic? Most burning question, I think, of this podcast is going to be, are you a pork pie person, a Scotch egg, a quiche? What's your picnic item of choice, Tom?
Anything I can add chutney to. A ploughman's for sure is right up my street, and pork pie definitely falls into that category, 100%.
What about you, Hannah?
Strawberries and cream. I think we're getting into the season now.
Yeah, we've got Wimbledon just round the corner.
We have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the sweet side of things. I think I am a Scotch egg girl. Gotta love a bit of egg, bit of sausage. What else can you? What else could you ask for? What about you, Martin?
I think I'm with you on the Scotch egg.
But I suppose on to other more important things that we've been seeing going on this week, not just all about picnics. Let's have a look and see what we've been finding out in the news.
Yes, before we go on to hear from Annabel Twinberrow, one of our analysts in the dairy side of things, Hannah, what have you been looking at?
Yeah, so a really big piece of news last week was the government spending review. A huge piece of news that has far-reaching impacts across not only agriculture but the rest of the sectors in the economy. As anticipated, DEFRA will see a reduction in its budget to £7.4 billion over the next 5 years out to 28-29. Their budget for 24-25 was 7.3, so on the face of it, it does look like an increase, but this is going to be in real terms. So this is adjusted for inflation, and so it's just over a 2% drop. So what that means is some erosion in the real spending power of DEFRA. I think speaking to Sarah Baker, who heads up our policy analysis team, it doesn't appear to be as bad as we first feared. We're awaiting some detail on how that money and those funds are allocated, as that's really important for the impacts of that budget on the sector. What we really want to see as AHDB is a joined up approach to this and really get a better understanding of how agriculture underpins government's key priorities. So we'll be closely monitoring the developments in the coming days and weeks as we get more information out.
Yes, certainly a topic on everyone's lips last week on where the budget, well, not the budget, it's important to say it's a spending review, would go. Although agriculture wasn't necessarily mentioned directly in Parliament, we've seen analysis that's gone on the DEFRA website, which you can refer to, or possibly on the AHDB website, you can go and visit and look at some of our analysis and some of those key stats. And as Hannah said, we'll be producing some more in the coming days and weeks. Charlotte, what have you been looking at?
Yeah, so also out last week was a report by the Department of Health and Social Care looking at the National Diet and Nutrition Survey. And this found that less than a fifth of all adults actually meet the recommendation for eating 5 portions of fruit and veg each day. Now, this has fallen. So we've seen that when we were looking back to between 2016 and 2019, this was around a third of adults that were hitting this. So actually quite a decline. So dropping that 16 percentage points. Now, interestingly, AHDB has been looking at similar points for research about how the health of the shoppers, the basket and what people are eating and how important this is. And a piece of research conducted by Grace Randall earlier this year was looking at the role which primary red meat plays within healthy baskets. And actually what we found was that shopping baskets which contain primary red meat, so when you think about primary red meat, that could be a steak, it could be diced lamb, it could be a chop. Those baskets which contain those products were more likely to contain plant-rich foods. So by that, it could be your fresh fruit, fresh veg, your pulses, breads. But what we found was that when these baskets do contain primary red meats, they are more likely to contain these healthier products too. So we are going to be looking at expanding this research project. Keep your eyes open. I think it's definitely a topic which we'll get Grace on the pod for when she comes out with the next stage of this research, because I think it's really interesting and really valuable.
Tom, what have you been looking at this week? I think you've been down the imports line, haven't you?
I have, yeah. There's been a bit in the news about supermarkets and their commitment to British meat, particularly looking at beef here. And we're seeing some, what it appears to be more foreign beef on the markets. I know particularly we've seen some questions coming in from our levy payers and supply chain about particularly Australian beef and what impact that's happening. And will we suddenly see a flood on the market? Because I know we've had high farm gate beef price at the minute, which a lot of farmers are seeing on their bottom line. But when we actually break down our imported beef, we can see from 2024, we've got 77% of our imports come from Ireland. So a significant amount. I know there's lots of beef producers over there. A company like McDonald's is committed to British and Irish beef only. It'll have a significant impact there. But when you look at that in relative terms to some of these other countries, such as Australia comparatively in 2024 had 2.3% share of our imports. So a pretty small amount. However, it is an increase on 2023. A quite significant increase, but relative terms, it is still a very small portion. When we look at quarter one of 2025, so that's January, February and March of this year, total imports, we've actually seen a decline in our imports. That is off the back of a particularly high start to 2024 from a country like Australia, 2.8%. That's 1,600 tonnes compared to 700 tonnes in 2024. But as I said, comparatively to other importers such as Ireland, 2.8% is largely overshadowed by our 77% imported from Ireland.
From a consumer point of view, we know that there is a huge amount of support for British. Consumers really do like the quality, the standards, the taste. We know that we do make some of the best beef lamb, pork within the world. So consumer demand is very much still there for British.
Right, well, on that note, I think it's time to take a quick break, and we'll be back afterwards with Annabel, one of our analysts in the dairy team, to talk about organic dairy production.
Hi, I'm George Craddock, analyst at the AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing Monday the 9th of June. UK feed wheat futures for NOV 25 moved upwards last week, but still traded below the 20-day average to trade at just below 180 per tonne. UK feed wheat followed global markets, with Chicago futures closing last week with a strong upward trend. This support came from an uptick in export demand for 25-26 crops, escalating war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as dry weather threatening yields in China. Paris rapeseed futures edged up slightly last week, following Chicago soybean futures, with renewed optimism around US-China trade relations, lifting market sentiment and fueling expectations for stronger demand. China's soybean imports surged to a record in May, with this increase in demand supporting global soybean prices as of late. Looking forward, favourable weather conditions in the US are supporting improvements in crop conditions. Developments in China-US relations and harvest progress in Brazil amid poorer weather are key drivers going into the week ahead. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat and dairy markets, head to ahdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
Welcome back to the Agonomics podcast with me, Charlotte, Tom and Hannah. Now, we've covered economics, fruit and veg and beef. So now I think it's time for us to jump into the world of dairy.
That's right. I've been speaking to Annabel Twinberrow, one of our analysts in the dairy team, and I began by asking Annabel about organic dairy production in the UK.
Organic dairy is using different standards to conventional dairy, so it's often the feed is kind of a main component which is different. So the feed has restrictions on use of chemical fertilisers, pesticides, and there's also restrictions on medications and requirements to provide cows with access to the outdoors as well.
Your article talks about organic dairy cow numbers going down. Can you tell us how much they've fallen and over what period?
Yeah, so looking at the recent organic farming stats from DEFRA, the number of organic dairy cows has been decreasing since 2019, and we've seen a 7% decline from 2023 to 2024. And that latest data does show that there's only 1.5% of dairy cows in the UK were under a organic system. So that's down from 1.6% in 2023 and 1.8% in 2022.
Even though cow numbers are down, organic milk deliveries are actually up this year. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So if we do go back to that kind of more similar period, looking at the 2024-25 milk year, they did fall by 5% compared to the previous season. But from December 2024, it's been followed by quite strong growth. And this 2025-26 milk year has seen even stronger growth, and it's now showing almost 14% increase from the year before. So really quite substantial. I think we're also annualising on a pretty bad year the year before. So if we look back to more historic data, it's kind of matching up a little bit better. But this year we have seen for conventional dairy as well, pretty good dairy economics, strong farm gate prices. And when we're looking at previous years, we've seen much more favourable weather.
So let's move on to what's happening in the shops. Are more people buying organic dairy now?
So we use Nielsen data for our demand stats. So during the 52 weeks ending the 19th of April this year, the volumes of cow's dairy purchased with an organic claim increased by 7% compared to the previous year. And then we look at total cow's dairy, which actually saw a decline of 0.7% during that same period.
You also mentioned exports. Why might now be a good time for UK organic dairy to look at markets like the European Union?
So we do see slightly more recognition over on the continent for organic being slightly more valued by consumers. And at the same time, we've seen milk volumes decline at the moment, and much of that can be attributed to the spread of blue tongue as well. So supply and demand factors coming in there. So
to wrap up, do you think this is the start of a longer-term recovery for organic dairy, or are we just seeing a more short-term boost?
It's very much dependent on the economic situation and how confident consumers are spending and how willing they are to spend on kind of added value goods. So while inflation has steadied, there's shocks that can come that aren't planned in that could put a dampener on the demand recovery.
That sounds like an absolutely fascinating report, doesn't it? It's a really interesting sector of the market that, to be honest, I'm not too familiar with organic dairy. So it's really interesting to hear that we cover that. And also that we talked about the weather last week and the detrimental impact that it's having on the arable side of things. But obviously, we've got our four-legged friends, very different sector, same weather. Well, it depends where you are in the country. But from a positive point of view, we've seen fair weather help turnout. And on the dairy side, we heard Annabel talking about how that's contributed to growth in production. So it's a really complicated picture, but really interesting to hear that. The other part of that report I thought was fascinating was on the consumer side and the opportunities and potentially the challenges with the organic dairy sector for consumers. And obviously a key point of what the future for that sort of sector looks like is consumer confidence. Charlotte, I know your team track consumer confidence, but what actually do we mean by consumer confidence? How do we measure it?
There are lots of different ways that you can look at it, and different companies will track it in slightly different ways. But what I think is a really great baseline for most people to think about is it's a trend. So whoever you're looking at for their consumer confidence figures, it's all about how does it compare over time. So you'll see it tracked on a graph. You'll see it quite often decline at times of uncertainty. So whether that was when we had lockdowns, war in Ukraine, whether it was when we've had political changes going on, you'll quite often see that there's a dip in confidence. But you then also see that recovery and you'll see that confidence increasing within the graph. And what's really interesting is you can actually tie in these increases in confidence with a lot of retail data. And actually it's getting reflected when consumers are feeling that little bit more confident in what's going on around them. They are sometimes going to be changing what they're purchasing. And that is going to be a benefit to your sectors such as your organic sector. It usually does have a slight price premium. When people are feeling that little bit more confident, they might be looking to make some more premium purchases, perhaps. And other areas which we've seen this happening in within dairy, I mean, Annabel did mention that at a total level, cow's dairy is in decline year on year, but that is mainly being impacted by just certain areas within that and not all of it. So areas which have seen growth have been cow's block butter. We've seen it in cottage cheese. We've seen it in kefir, and we've seen it in whole milk.
And to add on to that, we've just had a report come back with the GB milk deliveries, and peak month has set a new record high. So touching on your point that you made, Hannah, about the more favourable conditions, it appears, this year, been seen within our dairy herd as well in terms of our yields, up 5.2% compared to last year. That's a whopping 1,186 million litres in May.
How many swimming pools is that?
A fair few, I think.
That's the standard question, isn't it? How many Olympic-sized swimming pools of milk did we produce last year?
We'll have to come back to that one on next episode. Absolutely.
You mentioned cottage cheese and kefir there, Charlotte. I'm a self-confessed gym rat, so protein is a really key part of my diet, and trying to hit protein goals every day is really difficult. I mean, I have tried kefir, and I'm not sure if I fully like it, but there's a lot of great options out there. Anyway, you've done some work on protein-rich dairy products, and I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so Alicia Zane within the Retail and Consumer Insights teams just released a report which is looking at demand for these types of products. Now, you're going to have to forgive me, I'm not a gym rat, and my previous association with things such as cottage cheese was way back probably in the 90s. That's showing how old I am. It was people going for cottage cheese because it was good for diet. You know, it's low in fat, and I just remember it being not very nice, a bit watery, a bit lumpy, might have pineapple in it. But what we are seeing is that there are a lot of trends and there's a lot of demand now coming through for it. So times are definitely changing and perceptions are changing about what these kind of products can do within your diet. So we've seen that actually, when we look over the last year, we had an almost 30% increase in volumes of cottage cheese being purchased. Now, that is a huge amount. That's a lot of cottage cheese to get through. But thinking about it, I'm also a self-confessed social media addict. The number of people I see on things like TikTok and Instagram making cottage cheese pancakes. I mean, have you tried that one?
I've never tried a cottage cheese pancake. I've put it in pasta and stuff, and I quite like it. But yeah, you're right. The social media, I mean, my algorithm is absolutely full of gym stuff, and the recipes. I mean, sometimes you think just have a regular cookie, you know, you don't need to put cottage cheese in it.
Wouldn't be my choice is what we'd say. There's definitely this trend for it. It's a really good source of protein, particularly, you know, for some people that are looking for boosting their protein intake. And with these type of products, it's really playing on that trend as well. So there's a lot of noise in the media around ultra-processed foods, and I'm sure that most people will have heard of that term, even if they're not 100% sure what it means. Part of the reason you might not be sure what it means is there isn't actually an official definition yet. But cottage cheese, it is naturally high in that protein, so it sort of gives that reassurance to consumers that they can go out and purchase it. They're not going to be buying something that's bad for them. And yeah, it's just doing very well for some of these products.
Charlotte, how much of this is down to the packaging of these products? Because I'm constantly going down the aisle and seeing whether it's yogurt or some cheese or a sort of breakfast bottle where they actually label high in protein and it will say exactly how many grams of protein are in there. Do you think that's got something to do with this sort of increase in purchasing for these protein products?
A lot of the times, these products are naturally high in protein anyway. So this labelling isn't that necessarily anything's been done to these products. The protein's already there. It hasn't had anything added. And when we look at it, you know, things like kefir, things like cottage cheese, it's naturally in there. It's a really good value option for hitting potentially protein goals, which can be more important to certain demographics within the population. I think it's definitely, which came first, the chicken or the egg, I think, with this? Is it that the demand's there and they've seen that some of these other products have gone well that are naturally high in protein, so they're jumping on that bandwagon? Or is it that consumers want this and they're picking up on these items just because they're there? So, good question.
Really valuable piece of analysis there from our retail and consumer insights team. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for taking us through that. We're just going to take a short break again and we'll be back for our final part.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Welcome back to Agonomics Podcast, everyone, with me, Hannah, Charlotte and Tom. And we've had another listener question in. Producer Martin, over to you.
Yeah, before I give you that, I just have to say cottage cheese with pineapple, that to me is the same sphere as pizza with pineapple. No.
Anyway. No. Pizza with pineapple, oh, fine. I can get on board with that. Cottage cheese, no.
Oh. Anyway, let's move on to the reason why I was brought in, the question. So the question is, I've always wanted to know how seasonal events like barbecue season or Christmas actually impact demand and farm gate prices.
I'm going to straight away say this is something that the Retail and Consumer Insights team love looking at. Love a seasonal event. Last year, we released an updated report, which was looking at the impact that seasonal events has on red meat, so beef, lamb and pork, as well as dairy demands. So for loads more information from that point of view, please do head to the website. We all know everyone loves Christmas. Everyone loves to overindulge, don't they? We're all guilty of going out, purchasing that little bit more. And that is true for most consumers. Actually, if you look at purchasing trends across a year, you will see spikes at those peak times. So Easter definitely being one, Christmas being the main other. But for things such as barbecue season, that's a little bit hard to predict. It's very weather dependent. So if you have an awful summer, as in it's really wet, or on the other side of it, really hot, like we had a couple of years ago, actually people are less likely to perhaps want to go out and purchase those products for a barbecue because they're not sure it's going to be happening. But from a consumer point of view, you know, seasonal events are hugely important to demand for our products.
Touching on the religious festivals, I think it's important to mention when it comes to lamb, last year we saw an alignment of Easter and Eid, which really increased that price as that demand for lamb was quite substantial. You saw a lot of sheep producers looking at quite a decent price due to somewhat that demand. And Eid Ramadan is something that moves backwards each year as it's aligned to the lunar calendar. So it's not something we've seen this year when it comes to that. So one thing that's quite important to note is those timings, as is with barbecue season, that it's not always the same each year and it's dependent on a lot of other factors.
Yeah, that perfect storm we saw last year was really manifested in enormous price increases for lambs at that time. But of course, we're analysts, so we have to look at the whole thing, the whole market. Demand and festivals and religious occasions are just one driver of markets. Supply, just on that lamb example, supply was also back significantly because of weather and challenges with lambing and stuff. So yes, seasonal events are really important, and I think we saw the absolute extreme of that last spring. But yeah, the point you made around those Muslim festivals moving every year, I think is absolutely fascinating, and how that affects marketing decisions and why farm gate prices move over the year is really interesting to watch and monitor.
It isn't just Muslim festivals, though. When we think about Easter, that's very changeable. Last year was almost, it was as early as it can come virtually. And this year, 2025, was as late as it could come. Weather is going to be a hugely important factor then. People might be changing what they're purchasing. So people might have opted for a barbecue rather than your traditional roast. So it isn't just about the overall category, but the products which are being purchased within that category changing.
I had a trip around one of the major meat processors. I was fortunate enough to get a really good insight into their production lines. And they had one line that wasn't quite running at the time. It was a chilly February day, but it was a process line that, come the hot weather, would have been dedicated to that barbecue sector. Definitely something that the processors see and have to predict on the horizon of when we're going to go to the supermarket and purchase those big mega packs of whether it's sausages, beef burgers, lamb chops, all of the above, for when they're entertaining their mates at home or in picnic season when they're providing food for the masses.
Yeah.
They didn't have a dedicated Scotch egg line then, is what you're saying?
Not that I saw, no, Charlotte.
Producer Martin, we might be out of luck for this picnic week then.
Never mind. There's always a quiche to hand.
But what I'm also picking up on is we all just need a crystal ball, don't we? Telling us, you know, what's the weather going to do? What should I be planting? What should, I be looking at doing? What should I be producing? It affects the whole system, doesn't it? Not just your farmers, but your processors and your retailers too.
Well, I think that's all we've got time for today, guys. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? We started with the spending review. We then talked about 5-a-day targets for fruit and veg. We talked about foreign beef imports. And then we ended with organic dairy. So we've really been around the houses. Please do keep checking back on the AHDB website because we will be producing analysis on all of these topics and many more going forwards.
That's right. Go to ahdb.org.uk and make sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen and even leave a comment. I know it's possible on some of these platforms. And if we can make a special request, possibly a 5-star review if you enjoyed what you heard today.
And Charlotte's personal request, drop us a comment and let us know whether pineapple belongs on pizza or in cottage cheese. Should we going to know? As for producer Martin, we'll have a bet on Hey Martin.
Absolutely. Only one thing left to say. Happy Picnic Week, everybody.